Welcome. My name is Natasha Sherman, and I am your host. And my guests today are here to talk about a book called Inside Out, 50 Years Behind the Walls of New Jersey's Trenton State Prison. First, I'd like to introduce you to Jim Franklin, who is the author of the book. Welcome, Jim.
Thank you, Natasha.
And Harry Camisa, who lived the book, and you were a former prison guard at Trenton State Prison?
Yes.
For 50 years.
Well, I was a prison guard for 30 and a teacher for 20.
Okay,
but I worked
great.
at the institution.
Welcome. And my third guest is Teddy Roberts, who was an inmate at the Trenton State Prison for 18 years and then friend of Harry.
Commissions.
Welcome.
Yes, thank you.
So this is an endlessly fascinating story in my mind. I'm going to start with you, Jim, because you sort of pulled all of this together, and I'd like you to tell me how you came to write this book.
Well, Harry had been a student of mine when I first came to Mercer County Community College in 1968. The college had gotten funding to give courses to correction officers and police officers, and they asked me if I wanted to go to Trenton State Prison to teach correction officers, and it sounded challenging, sounded like it might be interesting to do. So
But what was the point? What were you going to teach them?
Well, they were taking courses in psychology, sociology, and in my case, I taught English. And the thinking there, of course, the sociology, psychology was to bring up the level of their education in dealing with the public and dealing with criminals. But in my case, in English, it was report writing. It was part of the rationale. But so I went down to Trenton State Prison. At that time, it didn't look then the way it looks now because they've built an entirely new prison in front of the old one. But I was in the firing range with all of these officers. They were older than I was, and I was somewhat intimidated. And Harry was in my class, and then I would see him. Then I went inside and taught inmates for a few years. I taught at Rahway, Trenton State, and Leesburg, and I would see him inside. And, you know, we kind of kept in touch that way. But then we lost touch for many years, and when they built a new prison, he called me up and he said, you know, I know that you know what the old prison looks like, but you've never seen the new one. Come down, I'll give you a tour. I went with my office mate, and he started telling all of these stories about his life experiences as we were going through the prison. And when we got outside, he said, you know, I would like to write a book. And I said, forget about it. It would take too much time. I don't want to get involved with that. But on the way back out to the Mercer campus, my office mate said, you know, his stories are fascinating, and I think you ought to do it. So I kind of got conned into doing it.
So to speak.
So to speak.
Thank you. So, Harry, I have a million questions to ask you because you were, as you said, corrections officer for 30 years.
Yes.
And then a teacher for 20.
For 20.
So how old were you when you became a
I started 21 and I retired when I was 74.
Wow. Wow.
Because I'm going to be 82.
Wow. That's amazing. And for me, it's amazing that you would last in a system like that, from my point of view as a civilian. So when you became a corrections officer, was it like just a job that you found, or did you have some...
What happened was I had gotten out of high school, and I wasn't a brain surgeon. I was not an electrician, a carpenter, or I didn't have no really talent, so I figured, well, I'll become a prison officer. That was the best thing open at the time. So I became a prison officer and started July 24th, 1950.
Wow.
And finally retired in 2002. But as a correction officer, I've seen so many changes in 50 years. When I first started, there was 10 days bread and water.
And why would you get 10 days bread and water?
For an infraction of the rules, or, you know, try to escape, homosexual act, anything. You would get 10 days. You would get 4 slices of bread, 14-ounce cup of water 3 times a day, and every 3rd day you get a bologna and cheese sandwich for lunch. But it went from...
I have a question to ask you.
Yes.
Did that actually have any impact on anybody's behavior?
I doubt it. Because we always had men coming in and out of lockup, which I worked lockup for 5 years, from 1960 till 1965.
So when you say lockup, what does that mean?
Lockup means it's a separate wing. It is separate from the other wings. Like a prisoner's like a wheel with the spokes, and one left lockup, it was called. It was to your right side. And you would go in there, and it had a capacity of 4 tiers, which are like rows. But the bottom row was for the bread and water, where you would give them 10 days bread and water for an infraction of the rules. And the only thing they had was a hole in the floor where they went to the bathroom, and they didn't have any lights in there, any fixtures to pull out. And what happens, you would go in there, and it was sort of like when you first entered one left lockup, was a vestibule. And you'd go through the first door, they had a large chain with a lock on, and you go in the next door, and they had a key, and they let you in, and you went in as the officer. You were there for 8 hours, you had no keys. You were just locked up in there with them. So what happens is you really get to know their behavior. But the thing that amazed me in the prison system was 50 years, I saw these great changes from 10 days bread and water to where inmates took college courses.
Right.
And I figured, this should change, but it didn't. And then in
Meaning it didn't, what didn't
I don't know,
change?
the recidivism rate was
Right,
the same.
right.
And in 1979, we had a 2A law, which if you were committed murder or rape or anything, you had a life sentence. You could go before the parole board 14 years and 9 months. Then we came along with the 2C law, which said you will do 30 years. So at the present time, we have 1,900 prisoners with, there's 1,900 there, with 1,200 that have 30 years before they see the parole board. And I just can't understand. I said, when they changed the 2C law, which they would do 30 years, I said, this law won't last 5 years. The jail will bulge out the sides. You know what they did? They built more jails. They opened up Southwoods, 3,000 men. Within 6 months, it was full. And
It's like warehousing, it's unbelievable.
Yes.
Teddy, I want to ask you, so you were in prison for 18 and a half years.
Yes.
And why were you in prison?
Well, during that 1960, well, actually in 1959, me and 2 other guys, we wanted to be gangsters, and we were sticking up nightclubs and things like that in Elizabeth, New Jersey, and a person got shot in one of the robberies, and so they caught us later on, maybe not right away, maybe about 3 or 4 weeks later, because one of the guys that we called snitch back then, or a rat, or what do you want to call him, a fink, and he got busted for another robbery of robbing a lady's pocketbook, which he already had money, but I didn't know he was using drugs at the time. And that's how he got caught, and he told on us. And next thing you know, they come to my house when I lived in Elizabeth on Magnolia Avenue, and they surrounded the house like we was, real gangs. They had cops out there like crazy. And they took me to headquarters and booked me and all that stuff. And next thing I went to trial I had a trial for 7.5 weeks. And they tried me for murder, first-degree murder, which I didn't kill nobody, but they still charged with it because I was a part of the crime, all right? And then when I came down to prison, Harry at the time was working in the mailroom when I met him, because I got there in 1960, in February 1960. And
So I want to interrupt you here because I want to backtrack a little. How old were you when you went to prison?
I was about 24 or 25.
Okay, so I hear a lot of, kids talk about, want to be a gangster. Can you remember back to that time, like, what was the appeal of that?
Put it this way. If you look at right today, they give a gangster more recognition than they give the president.
Yes, I agree.
So it was the same way back then.
So it kind of was cool, and you
would
would get
cool,
noticed.
I'm tough on the block. I'm the man. Oh, all that crazy stuff.
Did you ever think, like this whole thing about recidivism and I suspect at the time that you're doing it, you actually don't think you're going to get
You
caught.
don't think. That's the farthest thing from your mind. That don't even get to your mind, period. Oh? No, in other words, I'm the man.
Right.
Okay, that means I'm untouchable. That's what it meant back then. You know what I mean? If anybody want to see anything, they got to come to me. You know what I mean? And that, you know, in a way, but, you know, I don't care what kids. You look at kids today. Look at them today. Watch some of the programs they watch.
I know. I
You know what?
absolutely agree.
They're fascinated by them.
Yeah.
And it didn't change.
See, the difference between prisoners and me was
Right.
I always thought I would get caught. They
Yeah.
thought they were never going to get
So
caught.
everybody, your conception is altogether different. And
Yeah.
one of us got our own beliefs and convictions.
Yeah.
You know? So when I went there,
Were you frightened? Were you terrified when you got arrested?
oh, none of that stuff phrased me. Harry, I tell you, even when I was in the prison, didn't unphrase me.
Well, wait a minute. You had come up through the system, too.
Yeah, but that didn't even phrase me.
Okay, so
we can go back to that when you ask me again. But when I met Harry, he was in the mailroom. I just come in, okay, went to 7 when he put me in and everything. And the next thing I was going back to court, okay, and I tried to escape. I had shivs in a cigar, you know. And when I came back, they put me in a lockup where Harry was. I was in lockup then. And Harry used to feed me bread and water every day, except for one day, every third day. And, you know, and maybe 4 or 5, 6 slices of bread. So, you know, your body grows accustomed to that. Plus the cell wasn't that big, and the mattress on the floor was made of straw. Don't nobody kid you, it was made of straw. It was 6-inch concrete slab that high. The mattress may be that high too, but when you laid on it, it went down like that. And the bugs were in the mattress. Little bugs would bite you. So, and then you had the toilet, was in the hole in the floor, didn't have no trap in it or nothing. The rats would actually come up in it. So I used to stand up and go to sleep.
You would sleep standing up?
Stand up, yeah.
You have to remember the jail was built in 1835.
Yeah, that's right.
Andrew Jackson was the
Built.
7th president of the United States, and we still use that section.
Still used it, yeah.
So that jail is old.
Oh, older than
And
dirt.
at the present time, those inmates, she did away with the new administrator,
Right.
did away with all the shops.
Right.
They are locked in most of the old cells. They
Right.
have the new section, but the old cells are approximately 6 by 8, and they're locked up 22 hours a day. In fact, I've known men that were in there for 20 years, have never seen a leaf, a blade of grass, or a
right.
tree. Sister Elizabeth, the nun at the prison, brought in 3 leaves, and the inmates got in line to touch a leaf.
See, during the time that I was in the lockup, we had a yard. And Harry will tell you, we'd go out in that yard, wasn't that big, and I'd run like round about 13 miles and stuff like that. And in that lockup during that time, Harry will tell you, they had some hard people in there. I'm talking about bona fide killers. No ifs and buts and don'ts about them. They had them there. But I never had no trouble.
Because?
No, I didn't have no trouble with none of them. I didn't have no trouble when they had gangs in there, none of that. Because, see,
How did you avoid trouble?
He didn't.
No, I didn't avoid it. No. I didn't avoid it with the officers. See, he telling me the wrong way. No. I didn't. Officers, see, I'm the type of person, you can laugh and joke with me all day. You can cuss me out all day. But I'm not going to let you abuse me. That's all there was to it.
So you didn't have trouble with any of the inmates. So I
No.
want to ask, how did you manage that?
Very easy.
Yeah, what's that?
Because they knew what I was capable of doing.
Okay.
I used to box up there. I used to train guys. I trained Reuben Carter. I used to box a lot of them guys. James Scott, Kwai. I used to train all them guys and box them.
Teddy was a bull.
Was it what?
The
A
bull.
bull.
That's his nickname.
A
That's
bull.
that's my nickname,
He
Teddy the
knocked
Bull.
out Reuben Carter, who was the fighter, you know.
Okay, so from your point of view, how did this relationship develop? And then I want to ask
From
you a bunch
lockup.
of prison questions.
Okay. What happened was we were in one life lockup together for 5 years. So I knew when he brushed his teeth, when he got up, when he went to bed. I knew him better than my family.
Yeah.
So when he got out, one day I'm feeding him and one left through a little slot. You give him a spoon, take the spoon back. And he said, you know what, Harry, I've really had it. I'm through with it. I said, look, if you're sincere, I will help you. But like I went through 100,000 prisoners and maybe 5 I really could help. And Teddy was one of them. So I said, if you're sincere, I'll help you. So what happened was I was the only witness in the Muslim riot in 1975. And they held a wood chisel to my throat. And they killed who they wanted and everything. And what they did was, it was so bad. Being the only witness, that my son had a scholarship to Princeton Day School, and they had an officer, armed officer, outside with a gun in the class for a few weeks, because in the Muslim riot, they didn't know if the hit had come from Chicago. So anyway, get back to Teddy. So he said, okay. I said, when you get out, I'll help you. So being I was the only witness in the Muslim riot, I couldn't work in the prison anymore, and I had to go across the street and work in a halfway house. And when I was there, Teddy came over. So when he came over, I helped him get his GED. I helped him get 40 college credits. I called Jim, the professor. Every professor I know, give him a break, give him a break. And the warden at the prison, once he got out of lockup, he started working like, like helping me build this, build that, cement this, cement that. So the warden said, look, I'm going to take care of you. So he got him a job in Yardville Correction Center. Now it's Garden State. They took away the name. So the warden called up there, got Teddy a job at Garden State as an instructor to teach inmates how to do brickwork. But he needed 40 college credits, so that's when I helped him do that. And when he got a pension, I didn't get any of it.
Ask him who had to pay for those credits, though.
Who paid for those credits?
And the books, too. You know what I mean? You had to get there, I mean? But he didn't tell you the warden was Mr. Gary Hilton. Beautiful man. Gary Hilton
he was.
And Mr. Bill Farber, who was the commissioner at the time. Those two people, I can say one thing. They really will try to help a person, an inmate, an officers. They were beautiful people. You know, and you don't find too many back then were really beautiful. No story. Harry will tell you, you had correction officers there that were nasty. I'm talking out and out nasty. They believed in busting heads.
Yeah, all the
that's all they knew. That's all they knew. If they couldn't beat a guy down and make his head wide open and all that, and I said to myself, I ain't gonna lie, before they do that to me, they'll kill me or I'll kill one of them. That's right. That's how I felt. But hey, I never had a problem with the inmates or even officers. I got some right today that he knows that call me all the time, and they see me. I did work for them. Huh? See?
I have a question to ask you. I was totally blown away by what you said about not seeing a leaf or a blade of grass.
That's true.
How do people not go insane?
I always say that. Well, I think a lot of prisoners are insane. That's how they get there. But I agree with you. It just mystifies me. I've been there all those years, and how more of them just don't go crazy. It amazes me.
A fair number, too.
But tell them the ones that do go.
And you know, like when I had one left lockup for 5 years, I knew when a prisoner was going to go insane.
And how would you know that?
He would become immaculately clean.
Ask
Teddy. I would go to hand him a bowl of soup. He said, Mr. Please hold it under, shove it in. And then he'd wipe off the little sill there, and he'd scrub his walls every
and
day.
Also got religious.
2 weeks later, send him up to state hospital. Now,
it just seems, I mean, it seems barbaric. You know, I understand we have to have a system, and I understand we have laws, and I understand we have to have some place to put people off the streets. But where do we learn the lesson? I mean, warehousing doesn't work. It's inhumane. The recidivism rate is very high, and we end up building more prisons.
Well, a lot of it I blame on our juvenile system. I don't know why. I preach this all the time. The juvenile systems breed them. 80% of our inmates come through the juvenile system. And in the juvenile system, they get furloughs and you have pool, you know, it's like recreation until they come to Trenton. But then it's too late. And I still, it makes me angry that they have the young kids in dorms where they have gangs and they have 30, 40, 50 kids in a dorm. At night, if you get an officer who's dozing off, you get rapes, they rob them. It's, in 1957, I had to go up to Skillman because these kids had escaped, and they were running in the fields. In '57, it was all farmland, woods, nothing out there. They're running around, and I grab a kid. They had him from 9 to 16. He must have been 10, 11 years old. I got to take you back. He said, "Please, mister, they're going to rape me, please." I got tears in my eyes. I'm supposed to be this hard criminal, prison officer? And that's how it is. And even today, I don't believe in dorms. They should do away with them and have cells. Yeah. Where at night they could lock them in, where they keep their key and nobody could get to them.
Yeah.
But, you know, who am I to say, you know, nobody.
You are somebody to say. Jim, how did hearing all of this and writing this impact your worldview or your life?
Well, I was familiar with this, the world in there because I had taught there for 2 years. And it really, that's sort of where the title came from. It is an inside-out world. And when he would use prison jargon, I knew exactly what he was talking about. Or when he talked about certain personalities, I knew, you know, I knew that. But I'll tell you, the one thing that bothered me, I researched everything. He has a remarkable memory, unbelievable memory. And Mercer gave me a sabbatical to do the research just to verify everything that he was saying. And he was spot on everything that he told me. But the most difficult piece I had to write was about the murder of Megan Kanka in Hamilton Township by Jesse Temendekwas. And my daughter was 8 years old at the time, and Megan Kanka, the victim, was 8 years old. And when I read the testimony, the court testimony of what Temendekwas did to Megan Kanka, that was extremely difficult for me. Some of it was hard to write.
You know, it's interesting because I used to know someone who would say, "Oh, I don't watch that on television. I don't want that imprint on my brain." And I used to think that that was a little odd, but I'm starting to think that there are certain things like reading the details of a crime like that. Once you've read it, you can't ever forget it. That, you know, it has to change you somehow. I want to ask you, like, about executions. First of all, let's talk about that. So
Okay.
you witnessed executions?
13 of them. The first execution I saw was in 1954. Was a fella named Theodore Walker. He had killed a woman in a dress shop in Trenton, New Jersey. Molly Schlesinger, her name was. And he killed her with a machete. And what happened was, when he came into the prison, being I had never seen an execution before, they have him in a cell, they slit their pant legs up, they shave their head, they put a wet sponge on. But before they do that later in there. But 4 officers escort him down to the execution chamber, which is a 20 by 30, very gray walls, very dim. It's really morbid in there. And everybody thinks they pull a switch. Not so. You spin a wheel when you're electrocuted. So Theodore Walker walked in, being I had never seen an execution. He was stripped to the waist, and he had a cross on. A lot of them go religious. And when they spun the wheel and the electricity went through him, the cross burnt right into his chest. And I said, whoa, that really upset me. And after that, what I did was, if I'm going to watch another execution, I'm going to go up to classification, I'm going to pull his folder and see what he did, you know. So I went up to classification. Fred Sturdivant raped and killed his 4-year-old stepdaughter. Hey, then it didn't bother me as much. Ralph Beard cut his mother up for wine money, buried her in the yard. That didn't bother me that much. But I also, you have to realize back then, Theodore Walker, when he was 8 months later, they electrocuted him. There was no 10 years of appeals and so forth. And then they brought in lethal injection, which they never used. But I'd love to go speak in high schools and tell them the story. One night I saw 3 young Latino kids get electrocuted, one right after another. They were in their 20s. The 4th kid was sound asleep in the back of the car. They had robbed the restaurant, they had been drinking, went to the cash register, pulled the money. They got $9 each. The 4th kid, sound asleep in the back of the car, was 16 years old. When he got out, he was 32. So, like, you know, I tell these young kids when I speak at a high school, all you have to do is be at the wrong place at the wrong time. And another thing I tell them, you think jails like it was in Jamesburg and Annandale? You go to Trenton. Black Blake, an inmate owed him 2 packs of cigarettes. Teddy and I disagree on that. He always said it was over wine, but then we bicker over this all the time. But whether it was over wine or 2 packs of cigarettes, anyway, when you going to pay me? When you going to pay me? Look, I'm tired of you bugging me. I'm tired of you. Hey, when you going to pay me? I'll pay you. I'll pay you. Then finally said, look, you keep bugging me. I'm going to pay you. He waited till he was naked in the shower. He stabbed him 52 times. And as he was crawling away dying, he sliced the bottoms of his feet. So I tell these kids, don't think jail's a joke. You go to Trenton, we had an officer, Tony Turner, was immaculate. He used to like measure his name over his pocket, so it was just in the center. And on his desk, he had charge sheets, daily reports, all his papers. Had his pens lined up. He was a neat freak. So anyway, when you're an officer, you have runners who help you, inmate runners. So one of the inmates moved his stuff on his desk. He came in, he said, who did it? So the runner that helped him said, Chi-Chi Walker did it. Chi-Chi Walker said, you ratted? Now I owe you one. The next day, he went out to where they make license plates. He got the caustic soda, or did they take the paint off of license plates? I thought it was a bottle of water. I was working on a Star, which is the center of the hub. He walked by, hi, Mr. Camisa. All at once, the inmate, 24 years old, comes out screaming, his face peeling. They removed both his eyes, and he died 3 years later. So I tell young kids, life is so cheap in prison. And you see, I always talk with my hands, because an Italian with one arm shorter than the other, he has a speech impediment. Trust me.
I love it. This is a perfect place to break. We're going to take a break now, and then we're going to do the next half hour.
Okay.
All right.
My name is Natasha. Thank you for joining us.